I remember talking to a father who was recalling the challenging years he and his beloved spent longing for a child. It had been a long, discouraging season of loss and heartache, and yet both husband and wife held on to hope that they could bring a baby into this world.
Goodness.
He shared that in his fervent prayers in those years, he changed the way he addressed God. Calling on that well-known phrasing in the Nicene Creed, he prayed to the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. And so this father stands in a long line of faithful people through the ages who call on the past goodness of God to frame our present hope. The God who brought God's people out of bondage can be trusted to lead us again into freedom. When the people were exiled from the land, they knew God was a familiar companion in a strange land, and at last would lead the people home. Out of error into truth, out of sin into righteousness, out of death into life. We return to these family stories because they tell us who we are and who we have known God to be. On this fourth Sunday of Advent, we return to the work of the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life. Mary and Joseph are engaged, betrothed, but not yet sharing a household, when Mary is found to be pregnant. And we can only imagine how she might have shared the news with Joseph or been discovered, and whether she might have tried to have him understand the strange and holy thing that was happening to her, how she had said yes to God's invitation to bear this child. Do you know how lucky we are to have these stories? What would we prefer, a treatise on the character of God? A list of expectations of how to cooperate with the divine? How many hearts would warm and open to a resume from Jesus? A list of things done. Thank goodness that instead we have these somewhat embarrassing stories, domestic and dated and more than a little fantastic. Plenty of room to wonder about the character of God and ponder how much we ourselves might cooperate. These stories, if we let them, do their own work of preparing our hearts to make room enough for God's love to dwell. So this Holy Spirit, the giver of life, has been on the scene. Whatever Mary said or didn't say to Joseph has left him resigned to separate from her. We're told he is a righteous man, and so it seems he takes no pleasure in the idea. There will be no public shaming, but as quiet a divorce as is possible, for his sake and for hers. And like an earlier Joseph, the one with the coat of so many colors, this Joseph gets a message from the divine in a dream. The angel tells him who this child will be and how this child has come to be, and Joseph is reassured. And the Holy Spirit, Lord and giver of life, will give life to Joseph in a way he has not yet imagined. Even before Jesus arrives, his Spirit-given conception saves Joseph from the plainness of a tidy, righteous life, one devoid of mercy and all the social risks that come along with it. Joseph, too, consents to the new life that the Holy Spirit is initiating with him. When Mary bore the son that was promised, Joseph named him Jesus, the name that means God saves. And in claiming Jesus as his son, Joseph enfolds him in that Davidic lineage from which we would expect a Messiah. But at this point in the story, the gospel writer extends the meaning. He says all this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. The young woman will conceive and bear a son, and they will name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So Matthew, writing this story, reaches back to Isaiah to connect this moment, Joseph and Mary and the coming child, with Israel's history. Now, Judah's king Ahaz was caught in a triangle of political alliances, Syria and Israel aligned against Judah, And Ahaz is looking for cover from the bigger power, the Assyrians, and despite warnings that he should trust God and not get involved in this entanglement, Ahaz hedges his bets and sides with the Assyrians, not believing that God would be of help. And in that moment, God insists on sending a sign to the faithless king. Will it be lightning bolts and overthrown political powers and mighty displays of divine retribution? No, God will send a baby whose name will be God is with us. Into the political, warring, nasty mess, God sends a baby. Not a meme, not a press release, a TikTok, not a battle cry, but a baby whose arrival depends on faith and unfolds with trust and care. This is the sign of God's presence and promise. Now, any particular baby, the sign given to Ahaz, would have come and gone by hundreds of years by the time of this gospel being written. This baby in the story called upon is not Jesus. It's not predicting Jesus. It's another baby in another time. But Matthew, the gospel writer, certainly remembered and called upon that holy story when painting the picture of Jesus' birth, rooting it in an earlier experience of God's action to move the world to do things differently. Stories of God's goodness prepare our hearts to recognize God's action anew right in the moment in front of us. Joseph took a risk, trusting that giver of life, the Holy Spirit who so often disrupts what we have decided is our life. And what an enlarging surprise God's interruption turns out to be. Of course, neither Mary nor Joseph knew where God's invitation might take them, no more than you or I know when we sense the prompting of the Spirit and find ourselves willing to cooperate, though we don't know exactly what that means yet. But something wonderful, bigger and smaller, both immediate and yet to be, something wonderful was on offer here. And both Mary and Joseph ventured a yes that depended on the other and opened them to God's mysterious, life-giving ways. The yes from Joseph risked being out of step with the social order. Would he be thought a fool? And he took that risk to fill a deeper obedience to God, something beyond righteousness, a deeper and richer mercy.
Thanks.
We too might recognize that God's power is near and ready to lead us beyond what we have planned for. That is both good news and a good bit terrifying. No wonder God's messengers always lead with fear not. There's something coming that may shake us. For you and for me, as the poet David White put it, the call will not come so grandly, so biblically, but intimately, in the face of the one you know you have to love. Maybe these stories will help us say yes to the Lord, the giver of life, when we are being invited to stretch and to trust. Matthew begins his telling of good news with Emmanuel, and spoiler alert, he ends on the same note, God will be with you always. And the whole of Jesus' story, birth and life and ministry and death and resurrection and gathering us up into that resurrection, all fits within that stunning framework. This is the story of God being with us, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Even our deepest sorrows cannot change that truth, that God has chosen to enter history in Jesus to be near to us. That God will not abandon this world that God so loves, despite the ways we abandon one another. And God's choice, as we hear so clearly in Matthew's stories, is to disarm us, to come to be with us in a child, a baby, a diversion from Joseph's otherwise sound plans. The Lord, the giver of life, God is with us.